All right, everybody, welcome to class number 6 of Get Up to Speed training. We've done a lot of stuff over the last five classes, working with buyers, doing open houses, showing property, a lot of processes, a lot of stuff about getting your business structured and moving forward. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about writing an offer. What's it take to write an offer? What do you need to look for? Some little key things that are important to do in your contract, and also key things that are important to do to protect yourself in the long run from your contract. So hopefully you got my my recommendation, and if you haven't done that, or if you're watching this later on YouTube or something like that, pause this recording in a minute after I tell you what you're going to do. But you'll need to have a copy of the RPA, the Statewide Buyer and Sellers Advisory, and a blank addendum, a buyer's counteroffer, and a seller's counteroffer. Those are the 5 forms that I'll be discussing or referencing somewhat in this class today. So if you don't already have them and you're watching this as it's recorded, pause now, go get them, turn it back on when you have it. I'm hoping that all the rest of you at least have the RPA and the buyer and sellers counteroffers. I've sent that out in the email earlier. So we're going to go from there, and we'll get the other ones. I'll show them on the screen. And there's not a whole lot of detail on them, but there's a few things I wanted to point out on them. So without further ado, let's go to writing an offer. And we're going to start with the California Residential Purchase Agreement and Joint Escrow Instructions, known as the RPA. And one of the things that the California Association of Realtors did is add a few things. The disclosure regarding agency relationships. This form, by the way, is just there to say who represents who and how they do it. It does not create agency. So the reason I say that is it's important that if you are representing a buyer and writing a contract, you need to get a buyer representation agreement signed as well, stating, and that actually creates the agency relationship between you and your buyer. It creates a buyer's agency relationship. This does not. This is just disclosing what the agency relationships can be. Okay, and this is all required to be in the packet. And why is my form not loading up? All of a sudden I'm getting blanks. I was just on this. We'll wait for a second. Any questions from anybody on the question about the buyer representation agreement? And we have a few more online here, so that's good. Let me get back to this form. I was just opened this up and it was all there. I'm going to go ahead and close it down and reopen it because for some reason it didn't want to give us everything. So let's try it again. There we go. Possible representation of more than one buyer or seller. This is a required form. It's automatically checked on the RPA. Have your buyer and seller sign it. It just says that you may be representing more than one buyer, or you might be writing a buyer and a seller on the property. Again, it talks about dual agency right in here, but it also sometimes, you know, there may be a time when you have a really hot property. You happen to have 2 buyers in the same price range looking in the same area, and quite frankly, this one property might be the perfect property for both of them. By law, you need to tell them that you may be representing other buyers on there. You don't have to tell them how many, who they are, or the other offers. In fact, you're specifically restricted from doing that. But you do have to tell them you may be representing more than one buyer. If they have a problem with that, then you can refer them to another agent in the office to make their offer for them, take a big hefty referral fee, and send it over there. But do not do this without disclosing. You will be sued, and I don't like lawsuits. So Don't do that. Dual agency talks about it here and what it is and the duties of it. So this just goes, this is the table of contents on the RPA. And you'll see it has all the paragraphs numbered. So if you look at the structure of this of contracts, I'm gonna talk about contract law, not a residential purchase agreement. I'm gonna talk about just contract law in general. Contract law, basically every part of the contract is numbered and titled as to what it is. And it's done that way specifically so that if for some reason in a lawsuit later on one portion of the contract is found to be invalid or improper or not good, it doesn't invalidate all the rest of the contract. If it was just all one big contract, then all the contract's null and void. But by breaking it into separate sections and giving it headings, it allows one section, for example, maybe attorney fees was deemed improper. By throwing that out, it doesn't invalidate the rest of the contract. So that's number one. Number two, it helps us find what we're looking for by organizing it into what's happening in this contract. Okay? So that's an important thing. It helps you find exactly and hone in on wait a minute, we got a question about this. Where do I find it? It's going to be in the contract. While I'm saying this, let me say I get a lot of questions about how to handle things in the contract. And probably 95% of the time, as the broker, I answer the question by doing nothing more than looking at the contract. Okay? It's in the contract. Now, I tell you that so that you will get in a habit of looking at the contract. But if you can't find it, still, please call me. I am here to answer your questions. So I'm not trying to say, don't call me. I don't want anybody saying, oh, Ron said don't call me. Just read the contract. Figure it out yourself. I have not said that. What I am saying is that, by and large, the answer is going to be in the contract. So, before you call me, see if you can find it. And if you want confirmation, in fact, I love it when you call me and say, Ron, here's what's going on. And here's what I found in the contract. Is that the correct answer? I love that. I love to have those conversations. So good way to go. Okay, California Residential Purchase Agreement and Joint Escrow Instructions, page 1. Now, what I did is I already went into zip forms to save time, and I saved this as a PDF. We're not filling in anything else right now. I am just going to go through certain clauses and talk about what we could or should know in a contract. Two more things I want to go into about contract law. Okay? Some general concepts, again, about contract law, not necessarily the RPA, but just contract law in general. Is one, if you are writing something, never write it in a way that you hope to be understood. In fact, my first broker specifically said, Nancy told me, Ron, never write it hoping to be understood. Write it in a way that it is impossible to be misunderstood. To put it another way, think about it like this. If something happened to you and I, as your broker, had to step in and cover for you, or you're on vacation and you've asked someone else in your office to cover this for you, could they pick up your papers and, based on the contract itself, know exactly what is happening and what is supposed to happen next in your contract? Okay? Because guess what? In reality there is nothing else than the RPA and the addendums. This is the paper trail. So could people figure out exactly what you meant? So that's number one there. Number two, here's an important concept of law as well. If there's a dispute about what something means, where would that happen? In your addendums, counteroffers, because that's something you're going to write. If there is a dispute between two items, if the seller thinks it means A and the buyer thinks it means B, and the seller wrote it, who do you think is going to be ruled against in court? Well, it's going to be the one who wrote it. In this scenario I just gave you, it would be the seller. The seller's agent wrote a counteroffer. Buyer accepted it thinking it meant one thing. Seller thought it meant something else completely. Well, it's going to be decided based on who wrote it. It was their job to be very clear. If there's an open interpretation, that allowance is normally granted to the party who did not write it. So an important thing to know. And I'm going to point out a time or two where this can happen. So going through here, some of the things you need to know. Number one, right up here, this is an offer from. Make sure you know exactly how, before you fill this out, how you want your buyers and sellers' names on the paper. If they're getting a loan, it must match exactly how they're applying for the loan, including either middle initials or middle names, if that's how they're applying for the loan. So if they're getting a loan, make sure you talk with the loan officer to make sure exactly how he wants the names to appear on this offer. Otherwise, you're going to have to do an addendum, changing the names as they appear here with how they appear on the loan. And then everybody has to sign that. And, just save yourself and the other agent and the other buyers and sellers time by being very clear on this. Make sure you have the right address. In car form, in the zip forms, they have, as you type in the address, it will verify the address for you. And I did that on this one, including the 4-digit subcode. On your MLS printout, you should have an assessor parcel number. That's another thing to put in there. The real property can never be referenced based on the MLS number. That isn't possible. There's only two things that actually do it: the assessor's tax parcel number or the physical street address. The assessor's parcel number is probably the best. Double check to make sure it actually does point to the right property. But those are what we put in there. Now, going to the next thing under section 1, the offer. This buyer is buying this property at this price. So know what price you want to make the offer at. And then we're going to talk about how the financial terms break down here. So you're going to need to know what is their earnest money amount. That's the deposit, initial deposit. And how much are they financing? That's going to be put in here where it says loans. And then what type of loan are they doing? It'll be a conventional loan. That's the default. Or is it going to be an FHA or VA? Are you asking for seller financing? Are you assuming some financing? If so, you better get, the appropriate forms attached to this offer. So this is where we're going to put the Smiths are buying this property at this price, and we intend to close it. And there's two choices. You're going to check a box, and this is one where you're going to check one or the other. This is not you just don't answer anything. Where most of this contract is kind of you don't check a box. This one you have to say either you're going to put a specific date or you're going to put so many days after acceptance. Okay? Now, which one is best? There isn't a best. It all depends on what is the nature of the transaction. For example, if I want to specifically close on a specific date to make sure I have access to this house for my buyer on a particular day, they want to be in on that date, I'm going to go with specific date. If it's flexible, for example, the house is vacant, so everybody's already out of it, you may, or if you know there's going to be drawn out negotiations based on what you're asking for in this offer, you'll want to do so many days after acceptance. There's not a perfect one, but just make sure you select one. This is where we are confirming agency. Okay, and we're confirming who's representing who. Now, this is not establishing that agency. It is confirming that agency has already been established by previous agreements. A seller has his agency agreement via the listing agreement. The buyer has to do it with a buyer representation agreement. So make sure you have that. Okay? This is, again, we already talked about this form. It's already boilerplated into the CAR paperwork. So we talked about this basically. Now you're going to talk about how this purchase price is going to be broken down. So much is earnest money deposit. Are you going to increase that deposit at a later date? 99% of the time, the answer is no, so you put a 0 there. It's either an all-cash offer or there's going to be a loan, and the balance of the down payment here to total up here to the purchase price you put here. Okay? So this is going to require just a little bit of math. So if I'm putting a 10% down on a $400,000 purchase, I'm going to leave that's $40,000. Now, out of that, if I'm leaving a 1% earnest money deposit, that's $4,000. I'd have $4,000 here. I'm not increasing my deposit later. I'm not doing all cash, so I'm doing a loan. So my loan is going to be for $360,000. I'm going to type in, it's going to be a conventional, so I don't need to do anything. I can put in, and I should put in, the maximum rate this loan will be at. That's an easy way to kill the loan, because I'm saying it's going to be not to exceed this amount. If it goes over that, I'm not buying the house. Okay? And then additional financing terms, there aren't any, but balance down payment, I would put $36,000. So the $36,000 plus this $4,000 would total the $40,000 plus the $360,000 I have as my loan. Grand total $400,000, which is what my purchase price is. Any questions on how that works? Okay, moving on. So those are some things you need to know. How the seller wants to own the house, in what name, how you're going to do the financing. Pretty self-explanatory. When they want to close. Some things to look out for here. This is all under still financing terms. Verification of the down payment and closing costs. Boilerplated there is they're going to do it within 3 days, or something else if you put it in there. But 3 days to verify the down payment and the closing costs. Or if you're sending it with the offer, then check the box, verification attached. This agreement is automatically contingent upon a written appraisal, unless you say it is not. I will tell you, even if they are paying cash, do not check this box. Under no circumstances should you ever check this box, because even if they are paying cash, they should always have the right to have the appraisal, and you should urge them to get the appraisal, and I'll explain why later. Okay, loan of application, it's boilerplated for within 3 days after acceptance. You should deliver the buyer lender's loan letter that's based on the review, credit report, they're pre-qualified or pre-approved. If you're doing your job right, you already have this pre-approval, you're sending it over with the offer. That's the new standard today. If you're used to doing it the other way, don't do that anymore. Have them pre-approved before you write the letter, so you can send it over there. If you're using a company like AmeriFirst Financial and they meet the criteria, you can do the guarantee of up to $10,000 that they're going to get this loan. All they have to do is do the appraisal. You want as strong of an approval letter as possible. This just says it's contingent upon getting the loan, and they're going to act in good faith and diligently to try to get that. By the way, this appraisal contingency should be removed within 17 days. The loan is within 21 days. Only check this box if there's no loan contingency. Here's some other standard clauses moving down that are going to be in there. If it is subject to the sale of the buyer's property, even if they are already under contract, you must disclose that. Okay, I get that question all the time. Well, they're already under contract. Everything's moving along fine. You know what? If you want to have that out, you better check that and use the appropriate form, contingent on sale of property. right there. Use that form and attach it to this offer. Okay, other addendas. The buyer's inspection advisory is already part of this paperwork. That's going to be there, but I would say you should always have the statewide buyer and seller advisory. Always, always use that. I require it to sign off and get your paycheck. Okay, so that's the terms. Then there's the sale of property and other addendum. Now we're going to go to costs. What's going to happen with some of these fees that have to be paid here? So in section 7, it breaks down all of the costs. So they're always changing the RPA. We had a new change late last year. This one basically says here, is it the buyer or seller that's going to pay for the natural hazard disclosure report? And does it include tax, including tax, but does it include the environmental? I would say you should always have the seller pay for it and include the environmental. Prepared by, you can let the seller pick their company. If so, just say seller to select company. But could I recommend that you ask for it? And the best company to ask for it is from a company called Property ID. I have their card right here. What'd I do with it? Right over here. You want it from Property ID. Why? Because they actually guarantee, they have $1 million insurance policy if they're wrong on anything they state there. They are the only company that offers that guarantee. First American, everybody else does not offer any guarantees. If they're wrong, they say right in the back of their paper and all that fine print, if they're wrong, sorry, but we're not held liable for it. So you want somebody that's going to stand by it. Now, one of the things we typically get here is in California is a termite inspection and report. And you want it to be a clear report. So you're going to put it in here too. Depending on who's going to pay for it, you check the box and you're going to say a termite inspection and report, section 1. You want to get it repaired. By the way, on all this allocation of cost, look at this bold print. It does not determine who is to pay for any work recommended or identified in any of these reports. This is just who's paying for the inspection and the report. And then you have a third one if you want to put another. Say you have a specific report you want to see, there's a spot for it there. Okay, government requirements. Remember, we used to have to add an addendum for smoke alarms, carbon monoxide devices, and water heaters. It's now in the contract. So you just say who's going to be responsible for doing it. Typically, you're going to say the seller. By the way, if you're writing this for an offer, of course you want to, as much as possible, shift the cost of these items to the seller. Let the listing agent counter back if it's not acceptable to the seller. So if I'm filling this out for a buyer, most of these things are just going to be, if I'm going to put something in there, it's going to be the seller. Okay? Any inspections, reports, any mandatory retrofits, I'm going to set seller, seller, seller. Escrow and title. We had a problem with this one once because they checked both buyer and seller shall pay escrow fee. Okay. At what percentage? What breakdown? Okay. You just don't check buyer and seller. You say buyer and seller shall pay escrow fee, comma, each paying 1/2 of the total fee. You see how that ties into my be crystal clear. Don't hope they understand you. We had one where we said seller does that. Then they actually came in on another page and asked for the seller to pay buyer's closing costs. They assumed that this escrow fee was part of the other closing costs when my agent who wrote it specifically asked for this to be feed and a certain amount towards the buyer's closing costs. So she was saying something completely different. It went back and forth. It was a mess. Be really clear. Okay? Same thing here. By the way, if whoever you check here paying for the owner's title insurance policy, known as the owner's title insurance policy, they normally get to pick who issues the title policy and who's going to provide escrow services. Okay? So if you check seller here, then I would check seller there. Let the agent for the seller counter to something if they don't agree with that. But I would just automatically check those. The seller's paying it. Now, if your buyer's paying it, then you get to choose the title company. By the way, even if the seller's paying for the escrow fee, if you have a favorite escrow company, you can request that it be closed at a certain escrow. Again, let the other agent counter you on that. Okay? I know it's customary to write seller to select, and that's fine. I'm not telling you to be a confrontational or, obnoxious agent, but you can put it any way they want to. Again, protecting our seller, moving to Section D, other costs. If there's a county transfer tax or fee or city transfer tax fee, for example, Beverly Hills charges a 1% tax on all transfers in addition to one the county does. There's a state tax too. So you want to just go down here and as much as possible, if you're filling it out for a buyer, you want to say seller's going to pay these things. Let them again counter back if that's unacceptable to the seller. And they're going to have to negotiate it out. Home warranty, buyer and seller shall pay for the cost not to exceed blank of a standard or upgraded home warranty. Okay. Normally I go with the upgraded, and I go $450 or $500 and make sure it includes the air conditioner. Okay. That's what you're going to do to make sure that your buyer is protected. Or have them waive it and have them buy it themselves. But be clear, I would always have the seller paying for a home warranty. In fact, when I do a listing presentation and do my seller's net proceeds, I always put in there, Mr. Seller, you're going to pay for a home warranty for the buyer. Okay, important. Next item. Any questions so far on the contract? I'm going to go over here and check with the screen here. Okay, any other questions? You can either ask them or type them in. Okay, seeing none, let's move on. I hope this is all really helpful for you guys. Included items or excluded items. This is boilerplated. It's very important that your your buyer reads this part of the contract. Okay, if I have them on the phone, and I normally try to do this before they sign it, even though I send it over through dot loops for them to sign, I ask them to call me before they sign it, because one of the sections I'm going to go to is Section 8, Paragraph B, Subsection 2. And so it's Paragraph 8, Section B, Subsection 2. I'm going to have them read this out loud. And then I'm going to ask them, is there anything else you want to have included? Remember back to when we went through the house. Is there something we wanted to include? In fact, I normally ask this, besides the standard and customary things, is there anything you want to make sure is included? Have this conversation before you fill it out. It's better and easier to do it then than add it later. But I can add this in, or I can add it on an addendum following additional items, or I put it on an addendum. Make sure you're getting everything included. By the way, when I'm working with a seller, I'm presenting the offer, I get my seller on the phone and I have them read this. And then I ask them, is there anything in that list that you are not prepared to leave with the house? And something you want to have excluded, because then we got to make sure we counter it on the contract. Sometimes there's people have 2 refrigerators, so the box is all refrigerators. Well, maybe I want to take the one inside the house that's newer, but I'll leave the one in the garage. So to have that discussion, make sure you're addressing this issue here. Sometimes there's houses, believe it or not, that have more than one washer or dryer. So we want to address those issues. Okay. Again, most of the rest of the stuff is boilerplated, so there's nothing to do. When you're actually closing it and possessing the property is right here in Section 9. Have this discussion, because it's going to go back and play into, maybe you need to modify and change the close of escrow date, okay? Close of escrow is not when they sign, it's when they record, okay? That's the definition of closing. Now, some states, particularly if they're moving from the East Coast, they have lawyers there. The buyer and seller all go to the same escrow closing, and they do what we call pass the papers. It all goes around the circle. When everybody's signed, keys are exchanged. It's changed hands right there and then. So particularly if you have a buyer moving in from the East Coast, make sure they understand. when they sign is not when they get the house. If it's occupied, work out when you're going to get it. Okay? But if it's seller occupied or vacant, it's boilerplated here 6 p.m. Well, why would you want to wait to 6 p.m.? It recorded at 10 o'clock that morning. Why would I want to go till 6 p.m. before legally being able to possess the property if it's vacant? So you may want to address that on an addendum, simply saying that buyer will occupy the property as soon as notification of closing and recording has transpired. Seller authorizes buyer's agent to deliver the key upon notification of recording and closing, something like that. So that way they can get in right away. Okay, something to think about there. Tenant occupied properties, going to address that there. I like the state contract. It's boilerplated really well. Here are other disclosures that are right in there. You can't, so if it's the natural hazard disclosure, real estate transfer disclosure statement, lead-based paint. If it's built prior to 1978, you better use a lead-based paint disclosure. Add that in there, okay? Looking at other things you need to fill in. Really nothing else here because this is boilerplated. They have so many days to do it if it is in a HOA or a condominium. This defines exactly what you can do with the buyer's investigation of the property. Okay. Buyer gets to check the title and repairs and damages. Title investing, again, boilerplated. Nothing for you to fill in here. Okay. As I like to say, it's idiot proof, or in other words, real estate agent proof. Time periods. Very important. Time periods. Again, boilerplated, so you don't have to do anything unless you want to. Okay? The seller has 7 days to deliver all the reports, disclosures, and information for which the seller is responsible in these paragraphs above. Okay? That's good. So in 7 days, they have to get you a copy of the HOA, the CC&Rs, their real property disclosure statement, the supplementary questionnaire. All those things have to be done within 7 days. But if they request and you agree, you can always do it any other time frame you want. Buyer has 7 days to do all investigations. 17 days. Now, I may want to do that to 21 days to make it tie in exactly with the lending and to make sure that I have enough time to get everything done and any negotiations on repair worked out before that time frame. So I've seen that done where an agent has put 21 instead of the 17, just to tie it into the same exact deadline date. Access to property. She'll have access to the property, conducting inspections. Again, if you change it here, you want to change it there to 21 days. Removal, right, don't check this, because this says right away, we acknowledge these and we are removing those contingencies at that time. Make the seller request the removal of contingencies, because there's a little paragraph in here later that says, even though they're supposed to be removed, if they're not removed, they're still valid. So even though we said we're going to remove the contingency by this date, unless you specifically sign releasing them, they're not released. I know, California law, some judge ruled that way somewhere and it became part of the form. Okay? Everything else here that I look at has a boilerplate. Notice of seller or buyer to perform, right there, to or blank dates. This is not a contract class per se. It's writing strategies into your contract. We'll do another class that goes over this completely, and I'll get it approved for CE hours so that you have it towards your 45 hours every 4 years. Again, boilerplated, you have with 5 days to do your final inspection. Important to know. A lot of these things you don't have to go over or do anything of. It's just boilerplated. This is the part I always make sure my buyer understands, that their earnest money deposit could be serving as the liquidated damages in case they default. I say the buyer should always sign here, as should the sellers, and also here. If either party doesn't sign, then it is not valid. It is not mandatory. Okay. By the way, if you ever want to know days, what days means, or what count, how do we count the days, or what is acceptance? It's under section 30 definition. So, for example, your offer is accepted means the time the offer or final counter offer is accepted in writing by a party and is delivered to and personally received by the other party or that party's authorized agent in accordance with the terms of that offer or the final counteroffer. So, if I'm going to play devil's advocate here, if we have to have this done by 6 p.m., it has to be accepted by 6 p.m. today. What did you have to do by 6 p.m. today based on paragraph 30, section A? What had to be done? Reading some messages there, see what you guys have typed up. When I bring up the PDF, it covers where you guys are typing in, so I go back every now and then. Sorry about that. So basically, if I want to have this property accepted, I not only have to sign it, but I have to make sure it has been sent to the other agent. Now, they don't have to open the email, but I have to get it to them. This is why it's really good to use .loop, because you can have .loop on your phone. So if I sent it over to agent, to my buyers, and I send it out to both of them, again, ZipLogic only allows you to have one person at a time, but .loop, I can send it to both simultaneously. So I have a Mr. and Mrs. buyer. They both have to sign this condition before 6 p.m., or let's make it before 7 p.m., because what time is it right now? It is 6:38. So I'm racing against the clock. I want to make sure it's there. I send it over to them right now. Bing, bing, I get notified that they've signed it. I can right there, whether it's on my phone or on my computer, I can now turn around and share that document back with the other agent through .loop. I have complied before 7 p.m. They have to personally receive it. So you have to sign it, and they have to be received by the other party. By the way, I would also send a text message and I would call to make sure they got it. You cannot do overkill on making sure you have communicated this acceptance, particularly when there's deadlines and there could be other backup offers which then could claim it. Okay? Be very careful about that. Close of escrow means the date the grant deed or other evidence of transfer of title is recorded. So it already is defined what close of escrow is. By the way, days means calendar days. It is not business days. It does not exclude weekends. It does say if something based on how many days a day is the last day to perform is a Saturday, Sunday, or a legal holiday, it should be then the next, shall instead be the next day, meaning a day that you can actually do that. By the way, when I put in this contract, if I put 30 days after acceptance, okay, and it is accepted today, which is the 19th of September, okay, what date is this supposed to record on? If I do 30 days. The 29th? No, I have, so if I write it now on the 19th today, which date? Give me a date when this is due, which this is supposed to close on. Okay, let's go back to this agreement and see what this days means. Because what it really says is it's going to be so many days after acceptance. So acceptance happens today. When do we start counting? Do we start counting today? Does today count as one of those days? How many say yes? How many say today counts? Anybody? Anybody at all? This is the part of the presentation where you guys say something. No one wants to say. Okay, I'm going to give you the answer then. The answer is today doesn't count. It says that right there. Days after means the specified number of calendar days after the occurrence of the event, not counting the calendar date on which the specified event occurs. So if I accepted it today, my 30 days starts counting tomorrow on the 20th. Okay? So this contract is very clear. Most people just haven't read these definitions to know what it actually means. Okay? So if it's days prior, again, it's not counting the calendar day on which the specified event occurred. It's scheduled to occur. So bottom line is I have to close this. If it's signed today, I have to close this not on, because September has 30 days. So my closing date would not be October 19th. My closing day would be October 20th. You got that? Now, just for the fun of it, let's go down here and see. Can you guys see this? The calendar here? October 20th is a Thursday, so legally it could close that day. If I had said 32 days, that would make it October 22nd. So, since it's a Saturday, it can't record that day. It is automatically extended to the 24th. All by definitions found right here under Section 30, definitions in the contract. Okay? Every offer has to have an expiration date, meaning this offer is good, until, and the seller has until this particular time to sign it. Okay? Can the buyer revoke it prior to that time frame? Can they have a change of mind and say, oh, you haven't signed it, I'm going to revoke my offer? Can they do that? Yes or no? Just type that in on your GoToMeeting screen. Yes, yes. Okay, you guys are all correct. You can as long as it hasn't been signed, you can withdraw it. Absolutely. Okay, so then we go down here. There's the part where the seller signs. So any questions about this? By the way, there's that inspection advisory. It's just a part of the get out of jail free system that I call. Okay, any questions about this so far? Okay, let me go to the blank addendum. If there's something that isn't covered by a standard CAR form, and believe me, they have something that covers almost everything, this is where you're going to write it in yourself as part of the contract. Again, remember my caution, always be very clear and very careful about what you write. Don't try to sound like an attorney. Just write it in plain English. Use shorter statements and make sure you follow the right proper order of what, if something has to be done, you just kind of lay it out and write it out in the process. Sometimes I write this out on a piece of paper first to make sure I like the way it looks and sounds, and then I come back and write the addendum. Okay? So right there. Now, when you're putting it as part of a contract, The initial offer, it's an addendum. They are counter offers only after the offer is written and you're in the state of negotiations. So I've pulled up now the seller's counter offer. You've made an offer over, and the seller's made a counter offer to you. Notice this can't be done when it's a part of a multiple counter offer. Hold a different form. But he's just made a counter offer. This says that if those paragraphs I said that have to be initialed, if they're not, this does not automatically mean they are initialed unless you put in here that they are going to be initialed and agreed to. And this section B automatically changes if we're changing the purchase price. Say I offered 400, they were asking for 10. They were asking for 20. They want to sell it to me for 410. So if I come back, if they put in here purchase price to be 410, okay, right here my down payment and loan amounts will all automatically adjust to the same ratios, which means my earnest money automatically becomes $4,100. No one has to spell that out. It automatically happens, as it says so right here in paragraph B. Okay? Most people are not aware of that, haven't caught that. Then you spell out whatever other terms you have here. Okay? If they want to attach more stuff, they do that there. Again, there's a deadline here for this negotiation. Okay? And it's already boilerplated. It's 5 p.m. on the third day. Or and you can put in a time. What if this is a hot property, you want to make sure you get a response right away. You can put in a different time and date and make it happen faster. Okay? And that is shall be revoked and deposits shall be returned. So you have to do something by that time. Okay? And you have to get it back to them if you're accepting it. If you're countering it, you still should do it within the time frame because it's actually deemed revoked, but you can still do it after that time frame if you're countering it. Okay? The time frame is not as critical if you're countering it. That being said, again, we try to get along with other agents. So in every way possible, we try to always make sure we get it done by the deadlines. If you're accepting, you have to do it by the deadlines. If you're countering it, the deadline is a little less important. Okay, and so you go there. Now, if I'm accepting it, but I'm actually countering this one, so the seller countered 2 or 3 things, I'm going to counter it. We actually sign here where it says acceptance, but we check this box subject to the attached counter offer, which is going to be then a buyer's counter offer. And again, I'm going to put the things that I want to change. One rule of thumb on counter offers. If the seller counter offers 5 things that I wrote, and in essence 3 of those things that he now counters me are fine with, but there's 2 things I'm not okay with, my buyer still wants to modify those either back to the original position or something else, all I need to do is write the things I want to change from the seller's offer. Okay? So say on this seller's counter offer, out of the 5 things there, they changed the closing date and they want to have it on a date that works for their seller. After talking with my buyer, he's going to be out of the country that day. He can't do it and doesn't want to move that day. So he'd actually rather go even further back a little bit. So I'm going to go back to the buyer's counter offer. And everything else was fine. I'm just going to counter that one thing. Anything I don't put in this counter offer that was in the seller's counter offer is deemed accepted. Because remember, I checked the box accept subject to the counter offer. So we just keep by paper process refining it down and down till we're only arguing about one or 2 things. And when we agree to all those things, everything else in every other addendum is accepted. Okay? So in other words, if the seller lists 5 things on his form, I don't have to say items 1, 3, and 5 are accepted. Item 2 is countered to be as this. Item 4 countered to be as that. You don't have to do that at all. All I got to do is say, purchase price shall be, closing date shall be, And anything I don't address here that was on the previous form is deemed accepted. Okay? Any questions on that so far? Okay, one last thing. Statewide Buyers and Sellers Advisory. This is your categorical get out of jail free card. Use it on every single transaction. If you have other local condition disclosures, enclose those as well. San Diego County has one. I don't believe Orange County does, but I was talking with the guys up in Fresno. They do. Why do I want this? Because it protects us. I'm going to give you a classic example. We had a dispute. We won because we used this form. Square footage. You're always afraid I'm going to get sued by the square footage. Well, what does this paragraph say right here? Buyer and seller are advised that only an appraiser or land surveyor, as applicable, can reliably confirm square footage, lot size, property corners, and exact boundaries of the property. Representations regarding these items that are made in the multiple listing service, advertisements, and from property tax assessor records are often appropriate approximations or based upon inaccurate or incomplete records. So we're telling them right up front they may not be accurate. Fences, hedges, walls, and other barriers may not represent actual boundary lines. Unless otherwise specified by broker in writing, brokers have not verified any such boundary lines or any representations made by the seller or others. Brokers do not have expertise in this area. Okay? If buyer wants information about the exact square footage, lot size, or location of the property, broker recommends that buyer hire an appraiser or licensed surveyor to investigate these matters. We had a complaint filed against us with the Bureau because we had this in the file. The Bureau said we are fine and free to go. No further action was warranted. And language like this is on all these issues: soil and geologic conditions, hazard, environmental hazards. Okay? Whether there's formaldehyde, lead-based paint, mold, water intrusions. I mean, the list goes on and on. I believe there are a total of 12 pages of things that we basically are saying we are not responsible for, okay, or disclose that this is required by law. We get out of jail free if we use this form. So please use this form in every single transaction. Cash, otherwise use it. Okay. Bringing it back over here. Any other questions on this class? We got 6 more minutes for our hour-long class. I hope I've given you all something good to think about. Any other questions that you have? So the strategy here's my strategy always when I represent a buyer. I know it's a seller's market. Buyer wants me to make a lowball offer. My answer to them is, okay, what offer do you want me to make? Okay. My only caveat I might say to them is, okay, let me ask you this before I write this offer, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer. How will you be upset if they don't accept your offer and take somebody else's offer? If they say yes, they'd be upset, I might counsel them to offer higher. But if they say, like, nope, we understand we may not get this property, we're satisfied with that, I will write whatever offer they tell me, no matter how insulting it is to the buyer or seller. The reason I do this is because I have signed on to represent a party. I am going to represent them. I do not have to apologize to anybody else for an offer they want to make. Okay, now when I send that offer over, I'm going to say, Mr. or Miss Agent receiving this offer. This is a good offer from a good qualified buyer. It is the offer that they have wanted, that they have requested that I present. Now when I receive that, it tells me that without ever putting it in writing, you can't ever be sued on that, you have barely clearly stated, I don't necessarily agree with this offer, but this is the offer my client has asked me to make. I get that. I'm not holding you as the agent responsible for the ridiculous offer that has been presented. Sometimes, quite frankly, you as an agent need to get your buyer to make a bunch of those offers and get rejected, so they stop making ridiculous offers. I get it. I'm here to help you. As another agent, I'm kind, I'm courteous, I'm everything a good Boy Scout should be. Okay? I'm going to help you get that message to your buyer. By the way, it's not your job representing a buyer to tell them what the seller will or will not accept. You write what they want. Let the seller take care of himself. Let the seller be the bearer of bad news back to your buyer, so that they know that you are representing them. They can trust you to always present their offer as they want it to be. Guess what, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer? Sorry, the seller said no, and they said no because you're just way too low on the price. They don't even want to negotiate at this point. You are welcome to make another offer at a higher price, and maybe then they'll start negotiating. I've delivered that message to my buyers after I've presented the offer and the seller's agent has gotten back to me. So very critical to make sure that you represent your party, that you do it well, that you're faithful and loyal in following their legal instructions. Don't worry about embarrassing yourself to another agent. You can always call them back later after it doesn't go together and say, you understand, I just made the offer that my buyer made me right. I told them from the very beginning it was worth more. You can have that conversation after it's been rejected. You cannot have that conversation until it's been rejected. You represent them faithfully and dutifully. Okay? Any other questions about anything else about writing the contract? Just make sure you have all the information you need before you fill out the paperwork. I would recommend always that you use .loop to get it signed, because you can have multiple people sign at the same time. I had one of the agents here said, hey, the other agent refused to use .loop. I don't care if they refuse to use .loop. I'll still send it to them in .loop. It's their job to put it in their system, not me put it in their system. I send it to it in .loop. I give them power to edit in private if they want to, which means they can use it if they want to. If they choose not to, that's their problem, not mine. I have delivered it to them because .loop has sent it to them. So we always have that fight. Whose system we're going to use? They use DigiSign, they use DocuSign, they do whatever they want to do. You are not obligated to use their system. They're not obligated to use yours. But delivery in your system, and where they get an email notification that it's been signed, is delivery. So just to make sure you understand that. Anyways, next week, I can't remember what next week's class is, but I did recommend that you all take a CMA class, because I think what we're going to talk about now is we're going to shift from buyers to working with sellers. So one of the things we're going to do over the next week or two is we're going to do a listing input form, and we're going to talk about a CMA and a listing presentation. So if you haven't taken a class on CMA from your local MLS in the last year, I highly recommend you do one again. One, it'll count as CE. Two, things are changing always in the MLS. If you're using CR MLS, they just changed the appearance of most of the forms online. So I actually used one today and did a CMA. It looked great. It was actually easier to use. So get used to doing the CMA. Know how to do it, because I'm not going to teach CMA. I can't teach CMA over 5 or 6 different computer systems. I'm going to talk some strategies about CMAs and how to present them to your sellers. We're also going to do a field trip where I'm going to have you go out to a residential house and fill in the listing data input, the listing input form, and we're going to see how that matches up. So anyways, good stuff. Thank you all. As always, I'm available here, 760-277-7785. You may call me or you may email me at ronb@equity-usa.com. Anybody watching this online, have a question, concern, argument, or complaint with anything I said, I'm open to any of your suggestions and comments. Please email me or call me, and I'll be glad to explain why I say what I say. And if I'm wrong, I'll go and tell you I'm wrong, that you're right. I know a lot of things, but I don't know everything. But I hope you had an enjoyable class, and I wish you all a very successful and prosperous week. Goodbye.